Now, the identity of one of the country's top spies is still accessible online. That's despite assurances from the Queensland Premier's office it's been taken down. ASIO says it's accepted an apology from the Queensland Government after the spy's name was accidentally released. For more, I'm now joined by Blaxland from the Australian National University Strategic and Defence Studies Centre. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Kirsten.
Firstly, how big a stuff-up is this?
Look, I think we need to keep it in perspective. It's a slip. The gravity of it depends on the individual and the connections and who gets to see the person's name. Because in ASIO, you know, one of the things I like to tell my students is the secret of success in the espionage business is keeping its successes secret. And to make your way up in the ASIO hierarchy, it means you've had to have kicked a few goals along the way. You've had to have been fairly accomplished. So this person, I don't know who it is, but this person presumably has been quite successful in either counter-terrorism or counter-espionage and has built a bit of a reputation. And that may have been involving something that was probably something that was the government would have liked to have kept out of the public eye, and particularly the person's identity out of the public eye. But it's good to think about exactly why is it that ASIO has this kind of special status? Why is it that ASIO officers, of all the government employees, and there are some others whose identities are kept secret too, but why are they so special? Why do they have to keep their identities secret? And it goes back to the 1970s. And there was a group, an activist group for the Committee Against Political Violence, Political Police, sorry, CAP it was called. It was effectively an organisation that exploited some loopholes in legislation, and they went about exposing ASIO officers around about when ASIO was based in Melbourne in those days, and they would publicise their details. They'd go and physically go to their houses and protest in front of the house. They'd bring the media, the Channel 7 and various channels to the front doors of these people's houses, and it was a bit of a prank, a bit of a lark, but it had a bit of a dark undertone because what it did was expose people whose identities were being protected for pretty good reason to media scrutiny and to unwelcome scrutiny by people who had ill intent towards ASIO and to the individuals concerned.
Well, the ABC understands that the ASIO agent's name is still online. Are there potential consequences to operations currently underway or perhaps even future operations as a result of this?
Well, once again, it really does depend on the individuals who's being named and what they've done and what they're involved in, because depending on what operations they've been involved in, they could have still some ongoing ramifications. For instance, they may have been involved with a group that was particularly unsavoury. There may be some, what they can do is sometimes they can connect the dots between the person's name, their identity, and they can look back and say, I remember that bloke or that person, and figure out, reverse engineer the problem and come up with some evidence of ASIO being involved in something that they might not have otherwise been able to deduce. So, as I say, depending on the individual, they could actually expose a considerable amount of very sensitive information, or at the other end of the spectrum, and he's hoping, the person's been a bureaucrat and managed to hide in ASIO headquarters all the time and not spent much time outside of the organisation, and so the damages could be quite limited.
You can't rule out there might be personal consequences for the officer involved, or potentially even his or her family.
No, exactly right. And part of that is because in this day and age, what we're seeing is the challenges that people who operate in the intelligence community in organisations like ASIO is it's on a, much like it was in the Cold War. I wrote about this with my colleague David Horner. David wrote the first volume of the ASIO history. I wrote volume 2 and most of volume 3 with my colleague Rhys Crawley. And what was very interesting is that the Cold War, when we started writing the project, the Cold War seemed a bit passé, old-fashioned. But as we came to the end of the project, we found that ASIO was getting a little bit uncomfortable about what we were saying, in part because the game is back on. a lot of the counter-espionage, a lot of the counter-terrorism techniques and concerns were live ones again. And they're very much alive and well today. And so ASIO is pretty keen and understandably keen to protect the identity of its people, because it does want to protect them and protect their families and also the reputation. Because here's another point. ASIO employs a lot of people on the side. And so it's not just the ASIO officers themselves, but the people that ASIO works with, the agents that it employs, who could potentially be identified by the release of this person's identity. So it's, you know, there's layer upon layer of complexity here, and it is a bit of a bit of smoke and mirrors involved. But there's good reason for ASIO to want to protect its identity. Here's hoping, in this case, however, that the fallout, the negative consequences can be contained and limited.
Just finally and briefly, ASIO has accepted the Queensland government's apology. The AFP says it isn't investigating yet because there hasn't been a referral to it. Do you think this is the end of the matter?
Look, I'm sure behind the scenes there's at least some informal investigation going on, if not a formally commissioned one. But they'll be looking to tighten up procedures and protocols, and probably briefing up the Premier's office and various other counterpart offices around Australia about protocols with what you can and can't say about ASIO officers when they come knocking on your door.
John Blaxland, terrific to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten.